Please get some coffee, snacks. We have PlayStation 5s on the corner. Well, thank you so much for being here. This is the Conversation Coalition. Let's give a round of applause to everyone that has helped just putting everything together, please. All the volunteers. Thank you so much. And of course, thank you to the Donaldson Fellowship that allows us to be here, host us so well. And it's just a cool space to have this conversation. Okay. Well, Conversation Coalition, you guys know that, of course, we have a Facebook, and we have a Twitter. We have a Twitter, and we have social media, X, whatever, and then we have newsletters. So if you guys would like to be informed about future Conversation Coalition's events, I think there's a table there. You can sign up. Just know that the idea and our will, whether it's actually free or we're predestined to do this, or determined to do it, we want to do this once per month, the last Thursday of each month. So, today we're going to talk about evil and suffering on earth. Yes. Yeah, that's a great topic. We actually thought about, should we talk about not only earth, but the solar system, but since we don't know much about this, what's going on there, we wanted to keep it humble.
You haven't been visited by aliens?
Yes. So, but yeah, one thing I would like to say about this particular event is this. You might be going through something super difficult at this moment, you know? So we want to approach this topic and talk about it conceptually, philosophically. Hey, we hope that we get to the meat of it as people that we suffer too. We talk about this, but we really care about you. So just know that we're trying to keep all those things in mind. But we truly are sorry if you're going through something. But we want to talk about the topic and just be free and, expose our weaknesses as people as we talk about it too. So thank you for your patience with that. My name is Pedro Garcia. We have here, please, a round of applause for John Michalak and Elliot Martin. We're going to have a discussion, and then there's a Q&A, which my respect to speakers, even when I'm there. Q&A is just so fun to me. I just love, and by the way, coming to a place like this with your worldview, saying, what do these people think about this? I want to know. I don't agree with this. Oh, wow, that's a good point. That is just such a beautiful thing to do. It is just beautiful, no matter where you are. So thank you for being here. We appreciate you so much. So thank you, and let's start with the conversation. So, this wasn't prepared, but in 30 seconds, would you say something about yourself, John? Who are you? Why are you here?
Who am I? That's
Yes.
Another topic.
Say something. 30 seconds.
Why am I here? Who am I? I'm a Christian. We use the word theist around here. I've been involved with various types of ministry for over 25 years. I've worked in prison ministry for about 7 years. I've pastored a church. I've done all sorts of things like that. But I've also been a writer and written a couple books. And love this kind of talk, this kind of conversation, and appreciate people coming together from all sorts of perspectives. And I especially appreciate the idea that people who have different ideas about how the world works can have a conversation that's respectful and kind.
Thank you. Well, thank you, John, for being here. Elliot.
Yeah, I am an atheist, non-believer, secular humanist, theological non-cognitivist. There's a lot of words. I'm somebody who doesn't believe in a deity of any kind. I'm somebody who doesn't believe in the supernatural of any kind. I don't follow a religion or anything like that. I do a lot in this space. A good bit online. I'm currently the host on the longest running atheist themed call-in show in the world, The Atheist Experience. So not this coming Sunday, but I think the Sunday after. You could just call in and ask me questions directly if you want to. But yeah, I get to hang out with a lot of really wonderful people, both believers and non-believers. And just like John, I just really, really value these conversations.
Good.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you guys for being here. let's get to it. Elliot, I'll start with you, okay? Would you give us an overview of your thinking on this topic, evil and suffering on earth?
Yeah, we kind of budgeted ourselves about, 5 or 6 minutes apiece for this section, y'all, but I don't know that I need it that much. When I talk about evil, when I talk about good and bad, right, what I'm doing is I'm giving a description to actions or consequences, behaviors, ideologies, right? Just the things around us that happen get described based on a pretty simple concept that we all understand, at least in part, and more importantly, a concept that we all utilize when it comes to moral decisions, which is this really nebulous concept of well-being. So we all use that in our systems, it seems to me. And so basically, just to make it real short, because we'll go into this further, just a simple matter of harm or benefit, pain or pleasure, right? This is stuff we've been talking about for a really long time. You accidentally stub your toe, you go, that's not as good as a situation where I didn't stub my toe, right? Evil is just an extension of that, right? It's just a continuation down that path. There's a handful of criteria that we tend to add on to it, like necessity, right? We consider something evil not when somebody hits somebody necessarily, right? Because I could give Pedro a little push here, and we wouldn't call that evil, right? But there's a severity to the badness that once it reaches that level, we go, oh my gosh, that's evil, right? So that's really where I come from when it comes to evil. When it comes to suffering, suffering is just the state of being in those bad places, right? So like suffering is you just feeling the pain from stubbing your toe. And again, these are just descriptions of the world around us. I don't believe that there is any entity or force itself that is goodness or evil. So I'm sure we'll expand on more of that.
Good. Thank you so much, Elliot. What about you?
I'm going to take a little longer. It's kind of my style, I guess. Certainly I've thought about this, like most of you. My books aren't about this topic per se, but there's a section in the first book that is called What's Wrong and How to Make It Right. The second book has a chapter on what you do when life doesn't turn out like you planned. Has a section on human weakness, a section on death and how we deal with mourning those we've lost. So, and I have a podcast that has some episodes. But, as much as I've thought about this, I think I've come to the place of, I think it's a mark of maturity for anyone, that where you get to a place in life where you are comfortable with the things that are clear to you and fairly comfortable with the things that aren't so clear. And I think that certainly applies to this. I think probably no matter what you believe, I think that applies. I take a pastoral approach to this as much as I do to a lot of things, and by pastoral I mean I care about human application. I care about people and how ideas apply to people's lives. So where I reviewed a lot of the Christian approaches to this and the arguments that you hear about the problem of evil and things like that, and I was reminded that they didn't really sit home for me as much as they should, and they're helpful, but some people will say that the problem of evil and suffering in God, where you could talk about them on a scriptural level. We could deal with what does the Bible say. You could talk about them on a philosophical level, which plenty of people do, but what I cling to more is the emotional level, and it's if you don't believe in God, that's one thing, but if you're wondering whether God exists, the question is how could I even love a God like that? How could I? It's an emotional thing because this is a personal thing. People going through suffering are going to take it personally, of course, and then people who see the suffering and the carnage in the world are going to take that personally too. So I look at it that way. And so let me briefly talk about an area of focus that really helps me, and it's really about my whole kind of worldview theology. Viktor Frankl was a guy who wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. I love the book. I haven't read it recently, but in the book he has a quote that I really love. And he says, "He who has a why to live for can bear with almost any how." He who has a why to live for can bear with almost any how, a reason to live. And so he wasn't so much focusing on the question of why suffering, why evil. He was focusing on why even be alive in a world that has so much evil. And he had a good reason to ask this. He went into the concentration camps. He was a Jewish Austrian in World War II, and he, unlike most people, survived. One of the reasons that he survived was his why. He had a reason to just not give up from day to day. And he talks about different whys in the book. But the thing that I really clung to the most was the why of his wife. He and his wife went into the camps, but the Nazis would separate the families. And one of the things that kept him alive was the hope that his wife was still alive. If there was even the remotest possibility that there was somebody out there who he loved and who he could love in return, he had a why. He had a reason to live. So his why was a who in this case. And so when I think about looking at the world in the face of suffering and just again, down to the brass tacks of why even live, what's my purpose, what's my meaning, my why is more of a who. And I think a lot of us are like that if we just strip away everything, the most important thing in life usually is our relationships, our family, our friends, and that kind of thing. And so I asked myself the question, if the most important thing in life, the thing that gives my life the most meaning is relationship, personal relationship, then is it possible that the source of life itself is both personal and relational? And so, again, I hear all these conversations that are very helpful in many ways, but the thing that I think I most cling to in a time of questioning and suffering is that basic foundation. And for me, that starts with the existence of God and Him being personal and relational.
Interesting. Well, thank you. I think you touched a little bit on this, but how would you define evil and suffering? And likewise, what do you think are the origins of evil and suffering, Elliot?
Yeah, I did kind of touch on this in the overview. I think it's a description of the world around us, and I can break that down a little further as we have some back and forth. But I think on its face, it's pretty easy for all of us to understand, right? If we're sifting through a bunch of papers and we accidentally get a paper cut, I don't think any one of us here thinks the paper is evil, right? We think it was a bad situation that, good gosh, wouldn't it be awesome if it was different? Yeah, sure, right? But when we add certain criteria, and I think that criteria tends to be things like agency. So oftentimes when we discuss, morality or philosophy in general, we have this conception between an entity that, at least theoretically, seemingly has the ability to make a choice, right? Again, if I trip over this carpet on the way out of here tonight, nobody's gonna go, man, that carpet was evil, bro. No one's gonna feel that way, right? On the flip side, though, let's say one of you purposefully sticks your foot out, right, just at the last second and purposefully trip me. Well, then there's this added layer to the specific event. In both situations, I fell to the ground, right? It's even possible that in the situation where I fell because of the carpet, I got injured worse, right? But again, it's that other little bit of criteria of that agency that seems to push it further into what we consider evil. And again, I really just think it's a description at the end of the day. The origins of I also think is actually pretty simple. Again, my approach to these discussions is one where I say it seems to me we're all actually trying to play the same game. It's just that for some reason, some of us aren't playing the rules to the full extent, or we just don't want to follow the rules that we say we want to follow, right? Or sometimes it's just a matter of we're just not aware of everything, right? Like we're trying to play the game, but we don't have enough knowledge, and so we can't actually follow the rules. But yeah, again, that comes back to well-being, and I think the origins of all of this, the origins of goodness, badness, evil, suffering, pleasure, all that stuff is just reality. It's just the state of the world around us. There are consequences when certain actions happen. And again, our description as an agent, we get to then go, oh, here's a label for that experience. That seemed bad. That one seemed worse. That one seemed evil. So, yeah.
Okay. We'll go to a back and forth, but
Want to
please.
do back and forth, or
Yeah, no,
me
please.
introduce mine?
Yeah, please.
first?
Go ahead. How would you define evil and suffering, and what do you think are the origins of evil and suffering? Then we'll start. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to talk about similarities, but at first blush, I feel like we're on some different ground.
Oh, yeah.
So I saw the movie Oppenheimer recently. Didn't go see Barbie. I love the movie Oppenheimer. It was a long movie, but Robert Oppenheimer was one of the chief guys behind the invention, the development of the atomic bomb, and so the U.S. and the Allies, they wanted to win the war. They didn't want Germany to have the bomb first, so they had this huge race to try to develop it, and then they ended up bombing Japan. But one of the most fascinating things to me about the movie was that this guy who had spent so much time and had so much joy just cracking into the secrets of the universe, I believe it was when they first tested the bomb and saw what it could do, he immediately regretted doing it. And again, this is my interpretation, but I think he probably regretted doing it is because he realized that mankind had tapped into something in the universe that was beyond them, that they really had no business messing with. Now, have there been good things about nuclear power and energy? Yes, but I think what he saw was they had moved to a place where their wisdom and mankind's wisdom and maturity and foresight, all these things, and then not to mention different people's lust for power and things like that, made this a very dangerous thing. and so I take that back to the Christian story and the story of Genesis, where Christians believe that was where evil and suffering probably began. That Adam and Eve in the garden were offered a couple of different lies, and by lies I don't mean pure lies. They were given some half-truths. I think most of us don't fall for lies. We fall for things that have some truth to them. So they were told that they would be wise, that they would have their eyes opened and have wisdom. They would have a knowledge of good and evil, and people debate what that means. And that in doing so, that they would not surely die. There would be no consequence. And so that it was a half-truth, because when they ate of the fruit, their eyes were open, but what they realized was that they were naked. And I think that is a literal truth, perhaps, but also a figurative thing. Because, again, back to my idea that life is relationship. And if life is relationship and life is created by God, then it's in relationship with God that life is going to work best. And so they took a level of autonomy and initiative that maybe they didn't want to live totally outside of God's provision and stuff, but they wanted to kind of do their own thing. But what they realized was how naked they were as a result, that they no longer had God's covering. And so fear entered into their lives, and the instinct to hide entered into their lives. And so with that, goes the Christian worldview. Evil and suffering came into the world, and like Elliot said, evil is kind of a capstone word. We'd probably be perfectly fine saying Adolf Hitler was evil, or certainly his behavior and his thoughts and words were evil. The guy that next door that cheats on his taxes, I wouldn't call him evil, right?
Maybe not doing the right thing. But
Yeah,
not
he's
evil.
foolish, unwise, whatever. So there's all sorts of words that we can use under evil. And the other qualification I would make is that, you know, I maybe Christians will disagree with me, but I don't believe the Scripture teaches or experience teaches that the world is evil. There's plenty of good in the world. All human beings are created in God's image, so there's plenty of good. But because mankind decided to step outside of God's provision and live apart from God, they received the consequences of suffering. I think suffering is a consequence of evil, whatever that is, into the world. But the fundamental belief that I take, that I think a lot of Christians take, is that it fundamentally comes from sort of the Oppenheimer thing. We're tapping into an area of knowledge that you know, it's almost like when you give your it's almost like when you give your 16-year-old the keys to the car for the first time. There's things that they know about driving, but boy, do they have a lot to learn. They don't have the maturity, they don't have the wisdom. And, you know, so multiply that by a lot. Do I really have the ability to master my life apart from God? And so not being able to do that, I think, results in a lot of evil and suffering.
As always, I just hear all your comments and I just want to think about this instead of just, wow. So do you guys have any questions for each other? I do have questions, but please,
yeah.
go
I've
ahead,
got
Elliot.
stuff.
Yeah.
Because I agree. I think, you know, one thing we want to do is we want to highlight and point out the similarities. There are a lot of things that, you know, have occurred in the world that you know, will occur in the future that John and I will have no problem just totally agreeing, right? Again, always a great example, the thing that you bring up in an online argument whenever you're losing, Hitler, right? You just go to Hitler.
Poor Hitler.
Yeah, you know, but that was his greatest legacy, was being a YouTube comment. Anyway, I'm sorry, that was terrible. But point is, like, I think that fact of you come to this discussion from the complete opposite side of it, right? You come from the beginning, that's where evil comes through, whereas for me, it's like, oh, after the fact, we kind of put that label on it. We see what plays out, and then we put that description on it. What do you think that says about both of our worldviews, if you want, ideologies, whatever? The fact that even though we come to it from such a different, like literally opposite perspectives to start, like the fact that we come to the same conclusions a lot of the times, do you think that does say anything? Like, is this the Frank Turek thing where I'm like stealing from your worldview to get that way, or is it more like what I was saying, which was like, well, we're all kind of using the same concept? Like, what do you think about that, I guess, is...
Yeah, I would say I'm a high view of Scripture guy. I'm someone that, you know, trusts in the authority and the inspiration of the Bible. But I also believe that God created everything, and so it seems. And while I believe in, you know, the claims of Scripture, including many of the exclusive claims of Scripture, I still think but Scripture itself says that there's plenty of good and God's revelation, God's truths that are displayed all over the place. Anyone can walk out in the world and see it in nature, and also the fact that, you know, all people are created in God's image. So it's almost like I see it as a, you know, there are probably some bad beliefs and bad behavior. There are some good beliefs and good behavior, and then there's some better, and then there's best. The way I look at the Christian worldview is that to me it is the best explanation of the world. It's the best explanation of myself. It's the best explanation of good and evil. But that doesn't mean that you know, Elliot doesn't have a great deal of truth that he brings to the table, but I believe that because God created the world in such a way that He could, you know. So I don't believe it's some arbitrary, you know, accidental development of evolution or anything. I believe that God brought the good and the knowledge and all that stuff into the world, ethics and all that. And so there's definitely a universal aspect to it. But I believe the best version of that is the Christian story.
What do you think, John? Just a minute or two, when Elliot was talking about this as just like, please correct me if I'm wrong, okay, Elliot? Like in terms of describing it, like it's an easy thing to describe evil.
Describing evil.
Yeah, there's when it comes to evil, there seems to be agency, but at the end of the day, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't want to put words in your mouth. Like it's a matter of describing what the world is. So there isn't actually a thing called evil, but something that we instantiate or something that happens. And we describe it. Do you have any thoughts from your way of things?
How evil shows up?
No, what do you think about his view? That
it's simply just an observation of reality. Yeah.
1 minute.
Yeah, in many ways I don't disagree with it. I mean, it's just an observation of the world. It just doesn't attach it to anything, which I don't blame him for. He doesn't believe in God. So it's I don't know. There's a whole lot I have to say. I mean, I could make statements about good, better, and best.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't. So I guess my question, Elliot, is where. I mean, it's maybe my ignorance and not knowing you well enough. But I certainly I've gotten to know you well enough to know that I think you're a good guy, you're an ethical guy, you're a smart guy. But maybe this is even more of a personality thing for me than my faith. But I feel like I'm missing the meaning behind what you're saying, the purpose, the depth. That it's just this. It's almost like this zeros and ones and this automaton of reality. And so for me, it gets back to why be alive? Why?
Yeah. I think so. Just a little brief backstory on myself. I was raised Methodist, and one of the biggest discussions that led me out of a belief in God, led me out of going to a church, was the conversation on morality. For a very long time in my life, I thought there was no answer to moral questions unless it was grounded in a deity. Funny enough, there are lots and lots of moral philosophies out there. There are lots and lots of methodologies as to how to navigate the world around us that have absolutely nothing to do with anything godlike, supernatural, nothing. It's just all the stuff that's right here. That could be virtue ethics if you want it. That could be deontology from Kant. It could just be consequentialism. Like, again, my argument oftentimes is that we're all playing the same game here. Unfortunately, what has happened on the field is we've segregated ourselves into little groups, and we tell ourselves and others that the game that they want to play is only playable the way that we tell them. So I'll explain more on this because I brought it up earlier, well-being. And that's the meat of it. That's the tie it back into the world around us, right? So for whatever reason, don't need one, honestly, to follow this through logically. If you stub your toe, it hurts. Anybody in here doesn't agree with that, feel free to yell at me in the Q&A, okay? But that just is the case. That just is a fact of reality. Now, there are some people who, if we want to get real specific, there are some people who don't have nerve endings in certain parts of their bodies, right? For various reasons. And sure, it wouldn't hurt if they stubbed their toe, but we could easily come up with a scenario that is just as mundane and obvious to all of us, right? Like, for instance, any one of us getting our heads cut off seems to not be good for us continuing to live life and do fun things, right? Any one of us gets our head cut off today, we don't get to come back to another one of these awesome events. Seems bad, you know? Seems bad. That's just a fact of reality.
I have a question
please,
for
go
you.
ahead.
So I don't know the numbers exactly, but the last time I Googled it, somewhere between 80 to the 90 percentile of the entire planet believes in a higher being of some form.
Correct.
And so I hear you saying that you have a sense of purpose and meaning in your belief system, but why is the rest of the world turned to something higher than themselves?
Poor methodology.
It's what?
Poor methodology. So, unfortunately, we have a bad system for understanding the world around us, and we've only within a handful of years, and by a handful of years, just so everybody understands, I'm talking about like 20,000. So that's a very short time when you think about the billions of years that dinosaurs ruled this earth. But for a very long time, human beings have had an incredibly bad way of deciphering the world around us. Yeah. And there were certain things that we got to an answer that worked. It's not about being correct, actually, when it comes to perpetuating existence. And I don't just mean life, I mean existence. That's a deeper conversation. I'm sure we won't be able to get into that, but if we just focus on life, if we just focus on living things, we don't have to be correct in our understanding of the world to perpetuate the existence of us. I don't have to be correct about the color of this floor for me to still exist here and go get a snack. It doesn't actually change anything about the world around us. And so what has happened is systems have been in place that have worked. And it's only recently, again, within that like 20,000 year time frame, it's only recently that we've really started to kind of question those and push back on those and develop a rigorous methodology, right, for getting to as close to what is happening as possible. And again, in that process, I feel like what we have discovered is certain very mundane facts about us as people, right? And some of those facts include things like, this hurts, this feels good, I want this, I don't want that. And that kind of matrix, plus that added, I didn't have to push you down, right? I could have just not pushed you down, but I chose to. You didn't want that, and it hurt. That's bad, but it's also evil.
I would like to, thank you for that, guys. I would like to, before going to the next question, it relates to it. So you guys have presented, you talk about methodology, you, of course, in your conversation, you assume God existence, of course, because you're a Christian. A friend, now let's bring conceptually the conversation to real life to see how your methodology and your worldview applies, as you were saying at the beginning, to actual real life. If I come to you as a friend and I say, my wife just cheated on me and I was just diagnosed with cancer, how would you, Elliot, how would you deal according to your methodology and description? Yeah. How would you comfort me? And because I'm a human being, and for you, let's imagine that I actually don't believe in God. How would something that I don't believe it's real would comfort me in a situation like this? What I'm trying to do is to bring down this to an actual human life. Because we talk about 1-0s, philosophies, syllogisms, that's okay. But I'm in front of you, I say, you know, my wife cheated on me and I was just diagnosed with cancer. I'm going to die in 3 months. Elliot.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. Because, yeah, we do sometimes in these conversations, we do get so, bird's eye view of it that we really don't know what to do when something like this happens. So this is the frustrating thing about life, y'all. And if there's anybody here that, doesn't agree with this, again, please yell at me in the Q&As.
Don't yell.
Yeah, well, yeah. I'm just teasing. Yeah. This is a friendly thing. Don't. But there is no one-size-fits-all answer to every situation, seemingly. That just honestly seems to be the case every single time. There are patterns, right? There are things like, hey, in general, if I'm a jerk to this random person, like I'm probably not going to be able to get my meal, probably not going to be able to order probably not going to get it on time, probably not going to be well prepared, right? So there are patterns that we see in life. But the exact same set of bullet points to navigate each different situation is just not possible. And I think that's one of the reasons I do struggle with a lot of religious concepts, is because oftentimes it feels like it is this one-size-fits-all, and if you just follow the paint by numbers, you'll get this really pretty picture. But the only problem is all the colors are totally different this time, it seems. So when it comes to this specific situation, or any other terrible situation that, again, wherever we start this conversation, we all agree, like, oh my gosh, my house just got hit by a tornado. Yeah, I lost my children or my parents or whatever, right? These terrible things. What we have is a pattern, and that pattern is compassion. That pattern is understanding, right? So oftentimes we find, and we've got psychological studies on this, oftentimes we find one of the most valuable things you can do when somebody is grieving is just sit with them. Just literally physically be next to them. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to do anything. You don't provide any answers. You just shut up and sit there. That is incredibly powerful.
But if I say to you, Elliot, why does this happen to me?
Sure.
Would you answer, is it just a pattern?
I'd answer you honestly, and I'd say that unfortunately it seems that we live in a world where bad things happen. I'm not sure that that's something that, again, wherever you start this conversation from, I'm not sure that's something that we disagree on. There are bad things that occur in this world, whether you believe in a God or not. That seems to be the case. And unfortunately, when we are in those situations, right, oftentimes we do want to provide people with this list of how to get out of this, how to make this better. Yeah. But again, there isn't some set bullet points that we follow every single time and it works out. But there are, again, those broad patterns. There are those things that we know are beneficial. Somebody loses a loved one, we bring them food in the South. That's what we do, right? That's beneficial. It helps them. We can see the tangible effect. They don't need to worry about cooking food, So again, there's not a perfect answer for everything, but as we've continued down this path of trying to look at the world, more in the style that I'm describing, I think that's when we've started to get those better methodologies for how to help people. And that's why the field of psychology has advanced so much. That's why we have so many people that have received such benefit from therapy and stuff.
I want to ask you though, because I'm interested in your thinking, because you said 90% of people think about this, higher power, and you have described this as poor methodology. So if I were to ask you, but Elliot, I'm a human being and I want to know why. So the need that people have of asking why questions when it comes to that, do you think that is part of the actual poor methodology? Because it seems that we all want to ask why questions in those moments.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
But there is a point of absurdity, right? There is a point where we are continuing to push further and further on a subject well after everyone involved in the discussion has agreed there's no more progress to be made. That's the point at which you've been discussing with somebody for an hour and a half, and they go, yeah, but how do you know you're not just a brain in the vat? It's like, bro, you're only pulling that out now because we've passed way far down this discussion. Like, we've already gotten to such a ridiculous point now. And so asking why is definitely not inherently problematic, not in the slightest. It's the reason that we have developed these better methodologies. But simply asking why by itself will get you nowhere, because that's what a 5-year-old does that makes us all angry after a minute. Why is the sky blue? Well, did you know there actually is an understanding? It has to do with the fact that hydrogen is one of the most abundant elements in the world, and gravity, blah, 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 blah. But at the end of the day, some answers really are just because. Why does everything exist? Well, the answer, because it's here, actually gets us to the next step. It actually does allow us to move further. It would be awesome if we had a better answer for that, in my opinion, but nobody seemingly does.
Okay. Thank you for that, Elliot. So I'm sure you have a lot to say about that.
One or two
but
things,
hey,
maybe.
you're about to talk, and Elliot will have a lot. But I'm just trying to connect this to the next question. So,
It's a good connection.
John, I didn't ask to exist. I
You
didn't
didn't ask to
I
exist?
just showed up in the
Okay.
universe.
Yeah.
Pain, suffering, I cry, family members pass away, I have pain everywhere, I'm scared, anxiety, depression, hypochondria, whatever. It's pain, evil, suffering everywhere. And now you say, but there's God exists,
Yeah.
and he's actually good.
Yeah.
So how, in this situation, how would you approach a person that is dealing with these questions? So it's same thing. I've been cheated by my wife,
Yeah.
and cheated on, and then I have diagnosed with cancer. I've been diagnosed with cancer, and then I'm dealing with these questions because you're saying that God is good.
Yeah.
How would you approach a conversation with me or any person that is dealing with this?
Yeah. Well, let me first say that again, I agree with a ton of what Elliot just said. That what he describes is the human thing to do. It's now where we disagree is the meaning or the lack of meaning that he attaches to it. But and I do think I'm going to get to your thing, but I do think there is an issue sometimes with Christians where, because we see this hope that's ahead, because we have these beliefs about heaven and a resurrection, Jesus coming back someday, and God's going to make everything right, that we're not the best counselors sometimes when someone's going through something. Because, again, most of the time when someone's suffering, they don't need a lot of advice. Again, they need presence. Now, having said that, transitioning to the question, all this has happened, how could God be good? The reason is, even though, the biblical story is that mankind wanted to be like God, and they didn't think there was going to be a consequence. God, my assumption for how an almighty God, good God would handle that was, zap Satan, or just use your Marvel DC Comics superpowers to fix the situation and roll that way. But he didn't do that. The biblical story is that God's goodness is because he turned the tables on our expectations for what God should do. Meaning, he didn't detach himself from a suffering world, he entered into it. And so the goodness of God is that I get is, again, it's back to, and again, I agree with Elliot, I'm going to drive myself crazy asking why. But my why is ultimately found in a who. And so it's we're talking around a situation, because what would I say if somebody were in that situation? If they literally asked me about the goodness of God, I might share some of this, but I would be very sensitive to the fact that they're in pain and they're not really ready to do a theological discussion,
No, but this person wants it.
They want the answer. Yeah. So to
They're
me,
crazy like us. They like having these conversations.
Yeah. Okay. I would demonstrate the goodness of God first by doing what I think God did through the person of Jesus Christ. That he wasn't detached. We wanted to be God. He became man. We didn't think we were going to die. He died. He entered into our suffering. And by doing that, he became almost the best counselor. We're talking about somebody who is in pain. The person that I want around me when I'm in pain is somebody that, one, just shows up. And so Jesus offered less answers than he offered his presence on earth. But also somebody who has been through what I've been through. They identify it. We have people who counsel us who don't get what we've gone through. Jesus he didn't just suffer on the cross. He suffered throughout his whole life in many ways. But we also don't want somebody around here who is just going to be down in the dumps with us and just suffer with us. We want somebody who can walk us through that suffering to some place of wholeness and healing. And that's what Jesus did too. He did miracles. He offered words of comfort. He reached out to people who were outcast. So, I mean, I wouldn't maybe explain all this, and again, it depends on the moment, but what exactly I would say to this person. But to me, the goodness of God is that he invested himself fully in the eradication of evil and suffering by sending his son and having his son experience all the suffering that the world has, at least in a collective sense, and experiencing all the senselessness of an unjust death, so that he could bring suffering's final completion. And again, the thing that I even personally don't shy away from is trying to point someone to what's out there, whether it's heaven or resurrection, or you might die, but these are things that I believe. But what I want in that moment of suffering is to understand that somebody's there, somebody cares, and that's my description of God and why God is good.
It almost, and just in case y'all can't tell, John and I have hashed some stuff out over a few hours and some food and stuff, because we just genuinely enjoy having these conversations. So I might take it someplace here that seems a little bit weird, but I swear it makes sense to us. I will try. It almost sounds like, and I know I won't say this perfectly, but I'd love your feedback on it. It almost sounds like that in your view, without the suffering of Christ, without God coming down into the flesh, sacrificing himself and so forth, that really goodness would be curtailed a lot. Like we potentially even to the point that it wouldn't exist. Is that too far on my part? Does it make sense what I'm asking?
What is the meaning of curtail? New word for me.
Oh, like cut short.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I always say the first 2 chapters in the Bible are about the good, the creation. The rest of the Bible is about fixing the problem. That God immediately had a plan for restoration, and He did it in such a way that is as far above my head as nuclear physics are. Probably a lot further than that. But yeah, I don't think it curtails goodness. But it has a long view. I heard recently that hope is a long story. While it's not an eternal story, however the expansion of time between Genesis and Revelation it's a long story, and it's beyond me. So God chose a way to address this progressive resolution towards restoring the ultimate good, whenever that's going to occur, by taking suffering and evil's best blow. Rather than doing the superpower thing, he swallowed death whole, by letting it swallow him, is how I've heard it. And so, yeah, I don't know if we're getting into some deep stuff.
No,
here.
I know that was a
okay.
really good clarification.
No,
though,
it's okay. Yeah, it is interesting because I'm listening to you guys, and I go, and it almost feels like they live in different worlds. And then I said to myself, Pedro, that's the definition of worldview.
That's the
And I
definition.
said, oh my gosh. So this is the type of conversations I'm having. No, but it is super interesting. Thank you for sharing all of that. One more question before we go to Q&A. Unfortunately, we won't
Are
be
we really
able to.
at that?
I know. It is.
Oh my God.
So
It is
fast.
almost. It is almost Christmas. I don't know with these things. Time goes so fast.
I didn't get you anything.
But the Q&A is also good, So, Elliot, can we find purpose in pain? And related to this, is there any hope in the world given the presence of evil and suffering? What
Yeah.
would you say, last things about
Yeah.
the topic?
Both answers, yes. Again, to just kind of take a bird's eye view for a second, this is what the utilitarians call a higher pleasure. So basically, you go to the gym every day and work out, even though it kind of hurts and it kind of sucks, and you have to get up early, or you can't go out to the bar with your buddies that night, but you go to the gym every day and you deal with that pain and you push through that pain because you know there is a better outcome on the other side. Again, this is just a simple plus and minus calculus, right? The reason that we eat broccoli, yuck, is because we know all the good stuff that it does for us, right? So absolutely. In fact, I'll be really, really quick on this. There's an old story that I heard when I was a child, and it's about this king who really upsets this magical fairy in the forest, and the fairy curses the king's son. But the curse is one that everybody in the town says, my gosh, that's the greatest thing ever. The fairy gave the son the ability to never struggle at any new task. Every single time he picked up a new task in his life, he would be the best at it instantly. And the king says, you have cursed my son to the worst life imaginable, because it is that joy of working for something. It is that struggle of us taking time to study physics and then go, oh my gosh, I get it now. Like that is absolutely purpose in pain. That is absolutely meaning in suffering. And we all do this no matter what our worldview is. And then just on top of that, I think, is there hope in the world with all of this bad stuff, all of this evilness? Absolutely. Because it's just an extension of what I just said right there. It is a marvel of our society right now. As terrible as it is, as problematic as things are, you guys, it is a marvel that we are all in this room and not a single one of us has thrown a punch. Just 100 years ago, that is not the case. It is a phenomenal thing that every single day, more and more people around the world have access to things like clean water or just not being shot. That's phenomenal. And every single day, we get an opportunity to struggle for that better world. Again, one that we agree on despite a belief in God or not, right? And that's one of the reasons why I love doing this, because this allows us to have that opportunity where, yeah, again, John and I are coming at this from a totally different perspective, and yet we can stand shoulder to shoulder and say, my gosh, isn't it terrible that 1 in 6 children in the United States go to bed every night without food? That's terrible. Let's fix that. And we can, and we have been. We're not finished, but again, that's the higher pleasure. We will struggle a little. We know that's a fact of reality, but we can make something out of it. We can push towards a better goal, and I think we are for the most part.
Let's give a round of applause to Elio, please. Thank you, Elio. Thank you, of course. So, same questions for you. I'll just repeat it. John, can we find purpose in pain? And related to this, is there any hope in the world given the presence of evil and suffering?
Yeah. Again, plenty of ditto. There's so much that we can talk about in just basic life where we take it for granted. I would be hard pressed to think about things that are really meaningful in life that don't involve some level of difficulty, that don't require some work to maintain and prosper. So that's one. So there's plenty of purpose and pain that we can look at, here on the planet. And so where it goes deeper for me is back to the original Christian story. I've had the capacity to work with people who struggle from addictions, and so I've attended some recovery meetings, and I love the Alcoholic Anonymous, the 12 steps. You may be familiar. The first step is I admit that I am powerless over alcohol, but you pick your pleasure, right? Pick whatever is holding you down. I admit that I am powerless over this and that my life has become unmanageable, and that I am turning to a higher power to bring myself some sense of sanity, and I am turning my life over to that God, however I define him, to do his will and live under his care. And that's sort of an encapsulation of the return to this relationship with God that I believe mankind left in the first place. So again, the hope is found in the who. But the hope is found by not living in denial of a world of suffering, including the suffering that occurs in my own life, the weakness that occurs in my own life. We can look at a lot of problems in the world that occur because we are in denial of suffering. We manage our lives to avoid the existence of suffering and evil, and so we tend to get into trouble that way. But the beauty of, for instance, something like AA is that you admit your weakness and your need, but you join others in doing so. And I really think that apart from all the doctrines that we could talk about for Christianity, believer or non-believer, there could be a whole lot more hope in the world if we join each other more, in safe places where we can be honest about our vulnerability and our need. There would be a lot less, I think, suffering in the world. And that in itself that withness is a solution, right? Just being with people that get it, but also walking with people towards some form of healing and wholeness and restoration. That is a hope that I personally believe comes from the history and the story and the behavior of Christ. But I think it's something that believer, non-believer can do together, and that's where I think that's where I would take it.
Okay, well, let's give it a round of applause, please. Thank you, John, so much. Well, thank you, guys. Thank you, Elliot. Thank you, John. Yeah, this is fascinating. Just thinking about some of the things, so cool. Okay, well, it is time for you to shine. And now we go to the Q&A session. And just remember, ask your question. You can contextualize your question a little bit if you want to, but try to keep it short and to the point. Hey, when we finish here, approach Elliot or John. As soon as I finish, I'm going to run away from here. No, but if you want to approach them and just have a conversation, do that. But this session is more like back and forth, so that's why I'm asking you to do that. And I would invite you, Elliot and John, to give answers that are on point, okay? So we give the audience time to ask as many questions as possible. So thank you for this. And we have our friend, Aaron. Thank you, Aaron, so much. So anyone has a question for Elliot or John? I see these. This. What's your name?
I'm Hudson. That was loud. Thanks for coming, Elliot. I had a lot of time, especially when I was in high school, just watching stuff like this. So I think it's really cool and beneficial. I guess my question's kind of two-part. The first question is pretty simple, but if there was a God, so as a Christian, you believe that the God of the Bible is the God of, he rules over science and also transcends science. So if you believe, or if a God like that transcended science, so if the God that a Christian believed in did exist and transcended science, could they then, or could that God then accomplish the things that were said in the Bible? Like, would you believe that if that God transcended science, he could accomplish those things?
Yeah, potentially.
Okay, so I guess, and this isn't like an attempt to corner or anything like that.
No, please corner me.
I guess, no, I guess my curiosity would be, if that God existed and decided to do those things above science, and then decided to allow some people to see it at certain points in their life and give them the chance to know him, what would it take for you to believe in the God of the Bible if the evidence that you have right now, obviously the evidence that you have right now does not lead you to believe that. Sorry, I'll wrap it up.
Okay.
What would it take for you to believe in the God of the Bible if he transcends science?
Yeah.
Okay.
So just real quick to explain a little bit on the first one, potentially was my answer, because I think, unfortunately, there's still a lot that is very fuzzy. And so what we're doing is we're in the same ballpark of anybody else positing anything. If that's the case, if you have 5 different potential options that are all equally weighted, you don't have an answer. None of those can possibly be the answer because you have 4 other competing hypotheses that are just as equal. With that being said, though, in general, the methodology that I use in terms of evidence is the same everywhere. And that's what I suggest we all do. I suggest we do our best to try to apply the exact same steps in every aspect of our life. So for instance, I accept that John drove here. I actually have not seen John's car tonight. It is possible that it's not out there, but I accept that he drove here. That methodology that I use to get to that acceptance is the same methodology that I use that leads me to not accepting a deity, right? So essentially, reliable, testable, repeatable information, right? That doesn't mean that it is empirical. It doesn't have to be something that can be touched or, felt or looked at or whatever. But it is the exact same set of criteria always. So.
Well, thank you so much for the question. Thank you, Elliot. Okay, more questions. Yes.
My name is Scott. This is for Elliot. You talked a lot about things being evil and good. You reject the Bible, right? Right. So my question to you is then, how do you decide what is good? What is your standard for goodness?
Yeah, just back to what I was talking about, well-being.
What is your standard for well-being?
The same standard you use. If you burn your hand on a stove, is that good or bad?
That's bad. But
I would agree. There we go. We're using the same standard because it hurts. It hurts us, right? And so when things hurt us, yes, it's a subjective thing. Something may hurt me more or less than it hurts Pedro, but it does hurt both of us. And because of that fact of reality, we can then go to another fact of reality, which is, I don't want to hurt Pedro.
I'm okay with back and forth, but let's do only 2 minutes. But I'm okay.
Yeah.
You can, if you want 2 more questions, but we're gonna do only 1 or 2 minutes. You have anything else, Scott?
Yeah. If you have
you're still not really answering my question.
Sure.
The standard of goodness. C.S. Lewis said you can't have any idea what a crooked line is unless you know what a straight line is.
I just disagree with that is the problem. I think that's very problematic to go that route. So a lot of people will say that evil is the privation of good, right? It's the lack of goodness. But then you're still in the same boat. All you've done is you've kicked the can down the road a little further. So now we don't need to explain what evil is, but now you still need to explain what good is. So we're back to the previous question, where we have 4 different hypotheses that all seem to have no reason to pick any one of them over the other. But the one that we both agree on, that's the one that I'm sticking with, because it's the one that we both agree on. And unless we have a good reason to go further from there, then I don't see how we're being logical.
Scott, one last comeback, and we'll leave it there. Okay.
Well, there are lots of things, good and evil, philosophically, that are not physical things.
I would disagree.
You would disagree?
Let's leave it there.
I would say all of existence is physical. Thoughts are still physical. They're just a subcategory of physicality.
Let's leave it there. Thank you, Scott. And please, I'm sure that Ellie would
Those are
love
very
to
good
have
questions.
Yeah,
Very good questions.
to have the conversation.
Yeah,
Please.
please.
That is good. Back and forth is okay, as long as we respect each other. We are within a framework of time that respects other audience members. It applies to speaker and audience, to everyone the same. Okay, but that was very good. I would like to attend that conversation with Scott and you. Okay, so more questions, please. I want a question that goes for John this time. You are asking to John a question? No? Do we have anyone that wants to ask a question to? We'll go back to you, of course. A question for John, please.
Hey, John.
How are you? What's your name?
Kelsey.
Okay.
So, hope, on both ends, hope seems to be the response to suffering in some capacity.
Yeah.
For the Christian, from the Christian perspective, how do you address someone who's hope in God because they haven't seen any evidence that God exists by the things happening in their life, if that's how they're defining it? How do you talk to someone about hope when they've lost that hope in God? Because that tends to be where you go, is hope in God, right?
True.
Where Elliot tends to go hope in humanity, you tend to go hope in God. So how do you address someone who's not really seen the evidence of God, but they would, they grew up in the faith or something like that, but just
So
hope is kind of lost?
so this is someone that does or doesn't believe in God.
They don't know.
But they're not. They
Yeah,
don't know.
They're just like, hey.
They want a reason to hope, but they're not
Yeah,
sure.
but this God doesn't really seem to be responding to me, or
Yeah.
what? Like, I don't know how to,
Again, that'll depend on where they're at, I think, and what their emotional state is. If they're in a deep state of mourning, I'm probably not going to get into a lot of detail unless they really ask for it. But let's say they do, and I think all I could do is really express my own experience. Because as much as we like to think about it, people most often don't change their beliefs based on, lectures or really amazing logic, or that. I think I described it to, and again, this is how I'm going to explain it to you. I don't know that I would say it to this person exactly, but I said to Elliot, so when you go to a movie and you see all these different scenes and characters and writing, and then you walk out of the movie and go home, and someone says, "How was the movie?" And I say, "Oh, it was great," or "Oh, it was not so great," and they say, "Why?" I say, I'm not really sure. You went through this whole movie, and there's this pattern of stuff that contributed to your opinion about the movie, and so the first answer to me is almost like a counseling answer. My answer is, I hope I have a certain amount of hope in my life, but you need to have ownership over what you believe, and I really want that for you, but all I can do is tell you about the movie I've seen. You know what I mean? And either that connects or it doesn't. And that's why I think, believer, non-believer, the best thing we can do in a world that is hopeless is to just show up and join each other in such a way that, maybe you've heard the term relational capital, where I don't really trust someone who's speaking to my life unless they've done time with me, unless they've grown to know me. And so I know lots of people that are unbelievers that I have deep relationships with, and I'm willing to hear from them. They're willing to hear from me because they know that they're for me. And so that's why I'm saying we get so hung up over the why, but to me the most immediate answer is the who. That the hope that I can offer that person in that moment is simply being there and answering whatever their questions are. So and most of the time I don't know that I would go into a real long reason of why they should believe, why they should have hope. I would simply say, this is what I would love for you. This is why I have hope. But mainly, I just want you to have hope. I'm sorry you don't. But I pray that whatever that looks like, that it shows up in your life. That's my best answer, I think.
Yeah. Thank you, John. Let's go to, yes. What's your name?
Hello, my name is Ibrahim. Thank you for your talk. I wanted to ask a clarifying question and then a follow-up. So you mentioned that evil is determined by attaching an agency or other factors to the causing of pain, which pain in and of itself is not evil. So my follow-up question is, who arbitrates that standard? Is it individually determined? Because when you say it is what it is, the concept of evil is what is very descriptive. So does each individual arbitrate that standard themselves?
Yeah, just to make sure I'm on the same page, you're saying, like earlier I basically said like pain and pleasure, kind of a general framework, good and bad general framework. We go further down that bad thing. There's a handful of extra criteria we add on. That's when we say it's evil. You're asking, how do we decide that criteria?
Yeah, is it we or is it I?
Yeah, good question. It's both. It's the same reason that we're not particularly confused about the words that we're using right now, right? I have my own definition for blue, just like you do, but we also have a societal one as well. And it's not to say that, any of the three are 100% capital T big truth, right? But we get better and better as I go up to John and I go, hey man, what do you see here? And he goes, it looks like a square. And I go, cool, what color is it? And he goes, well, it's not red, but it's not purple either. Maybe it's blue. And then somebody else comes along and they give their thoughts and opinions, and then we adjust what we as a collective understand what blue is. So it's both. It's both in that situation. We have individuals that will make that description for themselves, but we also have one in society where it seems like everybody agrees. It's not to say it's right just because everybody agrees, but we just seem to find ourselves in a world where that's the case.
Yeah, follow
follow
up.
up
Short
real
one,
quick, yeah.
please.
Oh, it was going to be a long one.
Try your best to make it as succinct as possible.
So my follow-up would be that, does that mean that you're also then being subservient to this higher standard? There's a selfish standard of morality that you establish for yourself, but as a condition for existing in society, there's this communal higher standard which you must accept to exist.
So, A, not necessarily, and B, even if I agreed more with the kind of thrust of what I think you're asking, subservient definitely isn't the word that I would use, because subservience is a conscious action, seemingly. We don't use subservience to describe the way that trees drop their leaves in the fall. It's not that they're serving the winter, it's that they're following, they're following through with certain actions that have occurred, right? The sun just doesn't shine as much, so they don't have the ability to keep as much leaves, right? It's colder, so the extremities of the living organism just receive that cold quicker and more substantially. And so actions then follow. And so I would say that we're very much in a similar pattern where, because after a long time of a bunch of people speaking a lot of different words, we've all kind of decided this is what a car is. And it doesn't mean that that's everything to a car, right? There can be variation, absolutely. But because that's the case, right, that's why the officer can give us a speeding ticket, is because we have a general understanding of what car is. But we don't always have to adhere to it 100%, right? You can have certain things that I may say, hey, that's not really a car, But then this person goes, no, it totally is. And it does actually adhere to all of the criteria that we generally think of as car, but just me personally, for whatever reason, I have an extra criteria or less criteria. So it's a combination of the two. And again, it's something that we find in every aspect of our lives. If we sit down right now and really try to hash out a good definition for a chair, we're both going to get very frustrated very quickly, right? And so it's because of the fact that we both have that individual thing that does just live and die with me, but then we also have that collective thing that is something that's more than just you and me, but isn't just about history. Like, yes, this is traditionally a chair, but as we've continued to experience the world around us and we understand more, we update our information. So yeah, I hope that clarifies a little at least. So
Well, thank you so much for the question. If you want to talk to Elliot later,
Please,
please,
afterwards, please.
because that's a good conversation, man. Thank you so much for the question. Okay, we have, let's see. Oh, it's almost Christmas. We have 8 minutes, but so this is time for more questions. Please.
yeah, please.
Anyone else would like to ask a question? There. We have oh no, someone was scratching his head. Oh, there. That's a real hand. What's your name?
Krista,
Krista.
I have a question about suffering, one for each person. I'll start with John. As a Christian, you believe in God, you put your hope in Him, so when bad things happen, when you're talking to a Christian who feels like they've prayed, they haven't heard from God, they're going through a difficult time in life, and He has really disappointed them because He has not answered their prayers, or at least not the way they wanted or hoped, and they are left heartbroken that God does not seem to be active in helping them in life. And then for Elliot, as an atheist, you don't believe in God or have hope there. So I'm curious, when you go through suffering or hard times, do you have hope in anything or anyone, or how do you get through those challenges and navigate life when it gets difficult?
Thank you, Krista, so much. John.
Yeah, in some ways it gets back to the earlier answer that I gave, that somebody who's in that deep level of hopelessness, I don't know that I want to spend a lot of time lecturing them about the meaning of life, but again, just assuming that the fact that they haven't heard from God, the fact that things haven't shown up in the way they wanted to, I would first join them in that sadness and mourn with them. But, and then as I walk through them, again, we're kind of talking about these in the moment time, what would you do? Hopefully I would be in a relationship with that person where over time they might be in a place where they could talk about the broader picture. And so, I believe the biblical story talks about different sources of suffering and different engagements and lack of engagements by God. And the fact that a lot of the suffering that happens is beyond us. And we have the suffering of choice and consequence, but why doesn't God respond to certain prayers, or why don't I feel Him in my life? It's a very personal question, and so to offer a universal answer for that personal question can be difficult. But I think it would be helpful, to talk about, again, let's say she's in a little bit of a better place and can kind of talk about some of these things. Just to say that I would describe suffering, that I believe had a beginning as sort of tapping a huge boulder that rolls down a hill. And let's say this mountain is millions or billions of miles long. It spans the scope of history. And the further it goes down the mountain, the more debris it picks up. And so a lot of the suffering that we witness and a lot of is God allowing this boulder to roll down this hill for a greater purpose. And so there could be hurricanes, fire, violence, whatever. And so why God does or doesn't engage at any certain time is something that I don't know. But what I would encourage her to do is to focus on what is clear about God in her life. You're in a place of suffering now and questioning now, but there have been times in the past where you've had a lot of clarity about God's goodness. Because in any relationship, I think I want to lean more on what's clear about a person than what's mysterious. There's things that are very mysterious about my wife that I'm never going to get, right? And vice versa. But our bond is seated in what's clear about each other, and that holds us together when the mysterious stuff shows up. So in a time like that, I could see where I would encourage her to rest on the stuff that she's clear about when it comes to God.
Okay, thank you, John. Thank you, Krista. Elliot,
Yeah.
Krista's question.
Yeah. Before I touch your question, I just want to point out something that I think John and I very much agree on, and it's really, really worth mentioning this. You've heard him say multiple times, you know, yes, I get the scenario, there's this person suffering, there's this person deep in the throes of grief. This is not the time to be proselytizing his view, and I feel very much the same way as a non-believer. And unfortunately, there are people on, you know, every little, you know, niche of this discussion that do take those terrible, tragic events in life and use them as a way to, you know, prey on people, and they take advantage of people in those vulnerable situations. And so I just wanted to echo what John was saying, because I think that is so correct and so spot on. That is the time for us to be humans. That is not the time for us to push our ideologies or worldviews, right?
You would apply that to yourself too. That's
Absolutely,
what you mean,
that's
right?
what I'm saying.
Like, for
100%.
yeah,
If somebody comes up to me that is suffering, is grieving, this is not the time for me to go,
say,
ha,
oh, this
ha,
is why there's
ha,
no
ha,
God.
yeah, God let you down. Like, no, of
But
course
what
not.
I did add though was that I do think her question is part of her need.
Yeah.
And so love and care is usually about timing.
Absolutely.
And so I think providing that person an answer is still helpful.
Yes,
but
there's
at the right time.
there's a malicious way that it can be done,
It
and I
can.
think that is the thing you and I solidly agree. That's bad, right? But to answer the question, I'll be really specific, and then I'll be really broad. Okay. So for instance, there's a song by the Detroit Spinners called "Rubber Band Man." And it is one of my absolute most favorite songs in the world. No matter where I am, no matter how quiet or loud this song is, if I hear that bass come in, I get up and I dance, and I'm happy. So that's one thing that I do. I also really love to cook. Shepherd's pie is one of my most favorite things to cook. Yeah, woo! Got an Irish person here. So I do activities like that. I do things like this, you know. So that's the really, really specific to me thing. You know, you may not be a fan of you know, that type of music. You may not really enjoy that TV show or movie. That's fine. The real broad stuff is the stuff I've been talking about throughout the whole night. There's methodologies that exist in this world that we have gotten better and better at understanding the reliable outcomes of. And for instance, it just really seems to be the case. Doesn't matter what your worldview is, doesn't matter where you live or what time period, but if the way that you deal with a tragedy is by avoiding the problem and pounding back shots of Jack Daniels every second you're awake, surprisingly, that doesn't seem to lead to outcomes that we want. Whereas there are things out there, for instance, just a secular therapist. There are methodologies out there that we have shown consistently get us to those better outcomes that we're going for. Right? And even if we say, hey, maybe we don't have a good standard of what's a better outcome or what's a worse outcome on the broad scale, that's when it goes back to being specific. Because when applying these broad understandings of the world around us in these specific situations, again, the individual who says, this is the outcome I'm wanting, is more likely to get that outcome. And that just generally seems to be good in all of our viewpoints. That seems to be something that we agree on no matter where we start in the conversation. So again, like for me personally, I have some buddies that I hit up online and we chat, you know, while we vent about stuff, or I've got some TV shows or some music that I can just, you know, blast on the ride home. I'm gonna listen to Led Zeppelin the entire way home. Not even kidding. I've already decided it. So like that's gonna make me super happy. But for you, maybe it's going on a walk with your dog. you know? Maybe it's just sitting out in the backyard for a few minutes and looking at squirrels. But again, that falls back into those broader understandings and methodologies that we've gotten better and better at. So we're done, aren't we?
Well, yeah, it's just good conversation, good questions. Thank you so much. It is hard to always, being a moderator, you could say thank you, but how could someone close an event like this where we're talking about something as deep and personal? I hope this helps. I was just thinking about both of you talking, and I said, I guess we would agree on this together, which is such a weird thing that it's actually suffering what makes us learn. What a weird world this is.
That's why I think we need to understand what the best ways of dealing with suffering are.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I harp so much on that, is because, it does seem, again, just a fact of the world, there is suffering. But it also seems to be the case that, like, some of it is really good sometimes. And because of that, we have to figure out a way to deal with this that gets us to the best outcome.
Suffering is good. This is another conversation.
That's it. Clip that.
Next
We're done,
month.
folks.
No, that is a... But yeah, I'm very thankful that you guys are here. Thank you for your questions. As I said before, if you guys want to hear more about what's coming up, actually, I can tell you, next month we're going to be here. We're going to have a conversation about, can you be good without God? Is that the title? And for that, we have Tim there and Gary are going to be the speakers, and we'll working on a moderator. And then we have another one coming at Lipscomb University. It's going to be about science. And I think Elliot and I are going to butt heads. One has a lot of hair. This one has no hair. Interesting to see. But just very thankful that you guys are here. Please get some more snacks. Sign up for the newsletter if you want to, of course. Approach the speakers to have conversations. And thank you for spending tonight with us. Thank you so much. This is applause for you.